everyone. Thanks for joining our webinar. We're really excited to have you here today. My name is Meredith Ricefield, and I'm a Senior Project Manager in NSF's Sustainability Consulting team. And today we're going to ask the experts and learn a little more about soil health and regenerative agriculture. This webinar is going to be featuring expert panelists from Gaia Herbs, the Rodale Institute, and White Oak Pasture, discussing soil health basics and best practices, techniques to reduce cost and increase yield, an overview of the rotation of fields, nitrogen, phosphorus fixers, and other things, a discussion of nutrient-dense crops, farm productivity and fertility, and crop rotation. And this webinar is a forum to learn, to share knowledge, to ask questions, and to just learn more about soil health and building practices that can support farmers. Soil health and regenerative agriculture are a big part of the solution to meet brand sustainability targets, to address climate change, and to build farm resiliency. So for those of you who might be wondering, why is NSF doing this webinar? And for those of you who aren't familiar with us, NSF International has 75 years of experience conducting third-party audits and developing environmental health and safety standards. We are the program manager for the Regenerative Organic Certified, or ROC program, which is a holistic agriculture and certification focused on pasture-based animal welfare, fairness for farmers and workers, and robust requirements for soil health and land management. Additionally, we've developed the Soil Carbon Initiative in collaboration with several other partners and a group of over 150 farmers, brands, and soil science stakeholders. And finally, NSF Sustainability Consulting team, of which I'm a part, offers expert services to help your company reach its regenerative goals. So we put together today's webinar in response to the large volume of questions we're receiving on soil health and regenerative ag. And we're excited to bring you an expert panel as part of our larger webinar series on regenerative agriculture. And with that, I'm excited to introduce our panel. First, happy to speak to Dr. Andrew Smith of the Rodale Institute. He's responsible for administrating, facilitating, and implementing research activities, as well as leading and expanding the research team's impact on a global trial. Next up, we have Thomas Leonard at Gaia Herbs. And as Gaia Herbs Farm Operations Manager, Thomas seeks to empower farmers to grow organic, potent medicinal herbs and sustainable foods. He has a passion for reforestation and teaching sustainable farming methods, and brings an eclectic agricultural background, including experience as an independent farmer, spearheading community garden development, and managing a 300-acre commercial nursery and farm. We also have Will Harris from White Oak Pasture. Will is a fourth-generation cattleman who tends to the same land that his great-grandfather settled in ATD. And last but certainly not least, I'm excited to introduce you to my colleague Nova Sayers and our first speaker for today. Nova is a Senior Business Development Manager in our Sustainability Division, and she has over 15 years of experience helping companies deliver better products and impact on health, society, and the environment. She works with brands, suppliers, and retailers to shape production and sourcing strategy aligned with company mission and consumer values. And so I'll now hand things over to her to lead us off today. Thank you, Nova.
Thanks, Meredith. Hi, everyone. This is Nova, and I work at NSF helping companies bring healthy and sustainable products to market using our expertise and capabilities. And I've been leading our industry engagement on regenerative agriculture because we've discovered that it is one of the most powerful tools that companies can use to drive progress on their sustainability goals across many areas. And today, I'd like to share some context for why we're choosing to focus on soil health in particular in this webinar, and demonstrate that soil is literally the common ground we all rely on for business success and ultimately for our survival. Now, agriculture, as it's been practiced for the past 50 years, has been practiced using a lot of chemical inputs, machinery, fuel, etc., as you can see in the pictures on this slide. And this has produced massive quantities of crops and relatively cheap food. but it has also caused damage, including deforestation, desertification, loss of species, contamination of water, and pretty impoverished farming communities all around the world and even here in the United States. Broadly speaking, food and agriculture uses about 70% of our global water supplies, and it contributes 30% of the greenhouse gas emissions that are causing climate change, with about 80% of that coming directly from agricultural activity. And this is quite important if we reflect on the climate marches and the UN climate talks that took place last week. We know that society is looking to business and government for answers to these crises. But an even more shocking fact is that we're losing topsoil. In the U.S., we're losing 1.7 billion tons of productive soil annually, and this is causing an estimated 3 to 4% productivity loss in agriculture. So think about that for a moment. For many of you on the call today who work at fashion and food brands, you depend on agriculture for the inputs and materials to build your products. And overall, about 95% of the crops that we depend on for food need healthy topsoil to grow. By some estimates, we may have less than 60 productive harvests left before that soil is depleted. So this collateral damage from agriculture and our food system is a critical threat to each of your brands and the supplies that you rely on, and to society. But today, through this webinar and through the rest of our series, we'd like to show you that there is a powerful solution. And it's one that food, cosmetics, and fashion companies are uniquely positioned to use right now through your own sourcing practices. We can actually restore that topsoil that we've been losing through an approach known as regenerative agriculture. We can rebuild fertility, food security, farmers' livelihoods, and help reverse climate change using this approach to farming. In other words, we can rebuild our soil wealth. And on this next slide, we're going to explain to you a little bit about what those regenerative practices are. I'm not going to go into all the details now because we've invited 3 very knowledgeable farmers to do that with you. But I will say that this is, in general, a holistic, systems-based approach to farming that minimizes chemical inputs and machinery and focuses on enhancing natural processes to revitalize soil and restore fertility and productivity. And on the next slide, I've outlined some of the key benefits of taking this regenerative approach to agriculture. First off, we can build very high levels of soil organic matter and soil carbon. That is carbon that is drawn down out of the atmosphere and into the soil where it's actually productive and it helps to fuel the growth of plants. We can also conserve thousands of gallons of water per acre using this method, and I've given you an estimate of some of the potential there on the slide. And finally, according to many scientists, we could be storing up to 3 times more carbon in our soil than we are currently. And if we were able to do this across agricultural lands around the world and to increase soil carbon stocks by about 4%, it would be possible to mitigate all of the human-caused emissions that are contributing to climate change. So those are some really huge opportunities and benefits that we can capture by supporting a regenerative agricultural system. We want to empower as many of your brands and the farmers you work with as possible to be part of this solution. And today we've invited 3 dedicated farmers who are stewards of that soil wealth I was discussing earlier to share with you how they've been successful in rebuilding soil and also increasing farm profitability and ecosystem health in the places where they operate. They each farm in different regions, producing different crops and animals, and use a variety of techniques that will be useful to everyone listening in today. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Drew Smith from Rodale.
Thank you, Nova. It's a pleasure to be able to talk to you today about the work of the Rodale Institute. You can go ahead and advance to the next slide. So the Rodale Institute is a 333-acre research farm located in Kutztown, Pennsylvania. That's about 2 hours straight west of New York City. And although we're located in a single location We feel that we have a global reach. We perform not only research but education and outreach, and we do that in not only by promoting our work there at this site, but we have multiple locations, and certainly through our website especially, have a global reach. So our founder, J.I. Rodale, he came to this as an industrious. He wasn't a farmer. In the 40s, he was manufacturing switches in New York City, and he bought a farm in Emmaus, Pennsylvania, right near Allentown and close to our present site. And he started asking questions about how to produce food. He really came at it because he wanted to feed his family, and he wanted his family to be healthier. He attributed his poor health to growing up in the slums in Brooklyn and a poor nutrition. And when he started talking about how to produce food, and the experts at the university started saying, well, these are the chemical fertilizers and the pesticides and the herbicides you need to use to be a modern farmer, he said, especially from somebody who is a manufacturer, it doesn't make sense. If I want to be healthier and I put things that are toxins that really were actually meant to kill people in the soil, in theory, if I put more of it in the soil, then I'd become healthier, and we know that's not true. So how does that equate to make people healthier? So he started going through a period of exploration and talking to scientists and farmers around the world, in Britain and in India. And in 1947, he wrote on a chalkboard, healthy soil equals healthy food equals healthy people, and he started the Rodale Institute to start to put some science and research to what at that time would probably be called a chemical-free form of agriculture. And they were talking about things like artificial manures back then to refer to their fertilizers. And he started a publication called Organic Gardening, and actually a publishing company. And that's where we really got this term organic to be used for the first time in front of agriculture, and where we get the organic, the term organic today when we go to the food store. And then his son, Bob, was really a serious businessman, and he took the publishing company to new heights. And he really also said, we need to get more serious about the research, education, and outreach that we're conducting at the Rodale Institute. And he started looking at systems here in Pennsylvania, but all really around the world. He traveled the globe for work and visited a lot of different farming systems. And he said, when you look at it, we should be talking about regenerative agriculture, because if you do it right, you actually can improve the soil and the ecosystem and improve people's health over time, not degrade the soil like what he was seeing and what we've seen over the last 70 or 80 years. And he also said that there should be components such as animal welfare and fair worker standards included. And Bob Rodale was probably the biggest advocate for national organic standards and was traveling almost weekly to Washington, D.C. to push for national organic standards. And what we have today is our standards that generally address land stewardship. But he had wanted there to be components of animal welfare and fair worker standards there. So in 1972, Bob purchased the 333-acre farm where we are now. You can advance to the next slide. And said we need to start getting serious about showing off organic agriculture, because we've talked to farmers around the country, and we know that there's farmers producing chemical-free food on the scale of hundreds, if not thousands of acres. But most of their research at that point was more of a backyard gardening type. And he said, if we want to get serious and have farmers to take us serious, we need to do it, on a larger scale. So in 1981, Bob and Rodale scientists, with input from scientists and farmers around the country, started the farming systems trial. This continues today, and it's now America's longest running side-by-side comparison of organic and chemical agriculture. It focuses specifically on grain production, because that's the majority of the production in the United States. There's 3 different treatments that are included in this system. The first one is what we call the conventional system, and this follows the standard practices in the majority of grain production in the United States. All of our recommendations come from Penn State, and this is what they would be recommending to farmers in our region. And this crop rotation is 2 years of corn and 1 year of soybeans. The two organic systems, one of them mimics a livestock operation. There's no actual animals that go on the land, but it mimics a farm that would be producing for livestock. So it has a longer crop rotation. It's an 8-year crop rotation that includes forages such as alfalfa and grass, as well as field crops such as corn, soybean, oats, and wheat in the rotation. And you can see in the background there our neighbors who are organic dairy farmers. We recycle their organic dairy manure, we compost it, and recycle that organic dairy manure back into this system as a source of fertility. And the third system is what we call the legume system. This is our lowest input system that has no external inputs at all, and all of the fertility relies on leguminous cover crops. So leguminous cover crops are things like clovers, alfalfa, and these fix nitrogen from the atmosphere and can put that back into the soil. And what we found in this study was in the first 4 years, the conventional production beat the organic production. But after 4 years to today, there has not been a significant difference in crop yields between the organic and the conventional systems. It took about 4 or 5 years to be a statistically significant increase in organic matter in the organic systems versus the conventional systems. So today, the conventional system hovers around 2 to 3% organic matter, and it has not changed since we started this trial in 1981. In the organic systems, they hover around 5% organic matter, and they've significantly increased over time, or they significantly increased at least in the first 5 to 10 years of the project, and now have relatively remained stable. And that equates to about a 25% increase in total carbon in the organic soils. So I mentioned yields, and what we really find that is striking is that in the organic systems, every time there's a drought or a low rainfall year, the organic system outperforms the conventional system. And that's really why we have this comparable yields over time. And one thing to point out is at Rodale Institute, we try to run systems trials. So it's a whole system and long term, because your standard university trial is 2 to 3 years. And if we had run this trial for 2 to 3 years, we would have said, well, we tried the organic, we tried using compost, and look, the yields are lower, and there's no difference. But by being able to run this trial for now 39 years, we can actually show a lot and do a lot of measurements. So one of the biggest components of that, what I call resiliency during periods of drought or climate uncertainty, is the fact that we have higher organic matter or carbon in the soil. So we have greater water holding capacity, and we also, because we have better soil structure, we have more water infiltrates during rain, and less water runs off the fields. So that's really, ultimately, we attribute this increase in yield during periods of drought. You also see here on the slide that the organic systems use about 30 to 40% less energy, and also 30 to 40% have less greenhouse gas emissions. And due to the price premium of the organic products, they're highly more profitable than the conventional systems. One thing we recognize, though, in the organic system is that there's a lot of tillage. We rely on tillage to prepare the seed beds, to control weeds, which is probably one of the biggest difficulties in an organic system. So if you go to the next slide, you'll see something that we worked on to help mitigate the tillage in the organic system. And in 2008, in the farming systems trial, we actually added another component into the system where we split each one of the 3 systems and included no-till. So we recognized that across the country there was increased interest and adoption of no-till in the conventional system. And we took us a little bit of time but our executive director at the time, who was the farm manager, Jeff Moyer, came up with what we call the roller crimper. And what you see here in the upper left is a rye that was planted in the fall and produced high biomass. So we're producing somewhere between 5,000 to 10,000 pounds per acre of plant biomass. And in the spring, we roll that down with a roller crimper, and it terminates the cover crop, and then we can come in and plant right behind it. In this case, we're showing soybeans, but we can do the same thing with hairy vetch if we want to plant corn. And you'll see we call it organic no-till. It's not continuous no-till. There is tillage to prepare to plant the cover crops, but what we call it is a cover crop-based organic rotational no-till one-pass system. And that seems like a lot to say, so a lot of times we just say organic no-till. But by mounting the roller crimper on the front, we can do it all in one pass. If you look at the standard organic soybeans, in order to get that, we plowed the field, we dished the field, we packed the field, we planted the field, and then we cultivated 3 times. So I think I already lost count, but that's like 5 or 6 passes. Sometimes we have to come through and cultivate more. On the right, where you see the no-till organic soybeans, we made 1 pass in the spring over that field. And we are working on other pieces of equipment for weed control in that no-till organic system. I can tell you it doesn't always look that clean, and we've had a couple rainy years recently, so that's been difficult. And just for the sake of time, I've included the link here to our website where you could look at YouTube videos and other resources to learn more about organic no-till. So we recently tried to continue that link, or try to put that link together, where J.I. Rodale said, healthy soil equals healthy food equals healthy people. So if you go to the next slide, you'll see we've started in 2016 the vegetable systems trial. So this is similarly designed to our farming systems trial, but we're using vegetables. And the goal here is to start to measure nutrient density or nutritional quality in the different farming systems that we are putting into place. And we will to start to make that link between soil health and human health. And in doing so, we're also reaching out to medical professionals, because what we found is that if you tell people that if you improve soil health, you improve the health of plants, every agronomist agrees with that. And if you talk to medical professionals and you say, hey, if you eat a better diet, are you healthier? They agree 100%. But if you talk to a medical professional and say to them, if we improve soil health, are people healthier? Their eyes glaze over and they're kind of like, I don't know, what does soil health have anything to do with human health? They don't get the connection. They don't get the link. So we're trying to make that connection. And in closing, to my last slide here, I just outlined the principles of regenerative organic agriculture in priority that I see. And for brevity, I won't go through all of them. But again, these are just the land stewardship principles, which is largely what myself and the other agronomists at Rodale Institute have been studying, but don't include the animal welfare and fair trade or worker standards that we would think are important. And just to touch on the first one, which I have here, which is eliminate chemicals, I put that first because it creates a mind shift that if you're a farmer and you decide that I'm going to eliminate the chemicals, then a lot of these other things that are below here have to fall into place. You can't control insects and disease with our current organic chemicals without having good crop rotation. You rely on cover crops and green manures and having a perennial rotation for your fertility. You can't just buy it and put it on. There's compost and natural fertilizers are highly beneficial for increasing carbon matter and soil health. And as I mentioned before, we're working, and as a major focus of Rodale Institute, to reduce tillage and soil disturbance. And we think that for us to get from that 5 to 6% organic matter to 7, 8, 9, 10% organic matter, we probably need to think about how we would incorporate animals into our cropping systems. And so with that, I think I'll stop. You'll see here my contact information. Please feel free to email me or call at any time, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that I'm not able to answer today. So thank you very much.
Hey, good morning to everyone out west, and good afternoon to everyone on the East Coast. My name is Thomas Leonard. I am the Farm Operations Manager at Gaia Herbs. If you guys don't know anything about Gaia Herbs, I encourage you to check out our website, look up the company. We are a leader in the herbal supplement industry. We've been around for 33 years, and you can find us all over the country. We sell our products in Whole Foods and CVS and health food stores all across the nation. But anyways, I have a really awesome role there. I'm super passionate about regenerative agriculture and sustainable agriculture, and just the whole thing in general. I really try to approach everything we do at the farm from kind of a three-pronged approach, where I look at the social sustainability, the environmental sustainability, and the financial sustainability, of course, and really try to find methods where I feel morally okay with what we're doing on the farm, that we're improving the environment, that we're also really growing the best quality plants possible. So let's jump ahead to the next slide, and I'll tell you guys a little bit more about our farm. This is our farm map. Up at the top of the picture, you can see our manufacturing facility and our farmhouse. We do a lot of our extraction up there, and basically we produce like tinctures and phytocapsules with different plant-based botanicals in them. In the farmhouse, we've got an awesome chef who cooks lunch for all of our employees twice a week, and we also have a CSA program where we grow vegetables and set them out in the break room, and all of our employees can kind of take them home. So this is our farm here. This is 160 acres. We've got fields that range from about 15 acres and a few that are just over a couple acres. And this year we grew about 18 different herbs on our farm. This constitutes about 22, 23 different raw materials. And that supplies about, 30% of what goes into our products at Gaia. Some things we have to source from other countries. We use some roots from the tropics like turmeric, kava that we source from the South Pacific where it's native to, and they really have the right soils to grow that kind of thing. But here on this map, you can see a lot of what we produce on the farm. So the really cool thing about our farm is that we have really high soil organic matter. When we took over this property about 20 years ago, we had a soil organic matter of about 8%. So this is basically the carbon that's in the soil. Last year we got back test results that were showing that we were hitting 20% in some of our fields. So it is really an amazing thing. I managed a large farm in Virginia last year, about 300 acres. And when I did my soil test, I was really excited about one field that had like 2.98% soil organic matter. So we're really blessed to have this deep, rich soil here. One of the reasons why we have such great soil is if you look down there on the bottom of the map, that's the French Broad River. This is the river that goes through downtown Asheville, and it's a blessing and a curse to us. Every year, especially more recently when we've had more extreme weather, this river will rise up and kind of cover our fields and flood them, which is detrimental to many of our crops. But it's also a natural cycle that brings a lot of nutrients into our soils. So the pros and cons to every situation. But yeah, that's kind of where we're at right now. And so I really like looking at our farm as a regenerated farm. You know, we have done the work over the years, a lot of time putting in energy into composting our byproducts and replacing nutrients back into the field. You know, every time that we go out there and harvest from our field, we're removing nutrients. Those herbs that go up into our warehouse are little bits of nitrogen and phosphorus, potassium, carbon, calcium, all of that we're removing from the field. So we find it's our responsibility to replace that, and not just replace it, but also build on it. You know, we're trying to add more nutrients to the fields than we're taking away. And we do that through the decisions that we make as a management team at the farm. I've got a little illustration that I have in the background on my computer, and it's about landscape restoration. And I really like this one because I think it really simply captures a lot of what we're trying to do. It's kind of a step-by-step approach on how to repair your land and how to bring back a healthy ecosystem. So the first principle that they outline is erosion control. The second principle is soil restoration. And the third step is replanting. That all leads back to this healthy ecosystem. So I'm going to walk you guys through a few examples of different ways that we implement soil control, soil restoration, and replanting. So if you notice the creek that goes through the middle of the farm on the map right there, that is Kathy's Creek. It's really an amazing waterway. Basically on the other side of the road, it's all Pisgah forest. It's this giant national forest with tons of biodiversity. And that's where we draw our irrigation water. It's also where the city of Brevard draws their drinking water. So we are really lucky to have such a pure water supply, but we also look at it as part of our responsibility to keep that clean. So we do that through controlling the erosion right there along our streams. So one example is we have riparian buffers where we have wildlife areas with native trees that grow on either side of all the waterways on the farm. And we're working on enlarging some of those and really making sure that we have a really good, healthy community there. You know, we're focusing on things like removing invasive species and really trying to keep the type of plants that are native to our landscape and that really serve the wildlife that's endemic to our region. Another way we've prevented erosion is we created something that we call around the farm erosion barriers or erosion fences. So we've got a large crop of hawthorn trees, and we harvest the leaves and flowers off these. And in doing this, we'll prune off some of the branches. And so rather than taking those branches and burning them and releasing them to the atmosphere or throwing them in a trash pile in the corner of the farm, we actually line these up at the bottom of our field, right along the creek. And we did this on contours, so they're perpendicular to slope. And we call this a contour line, and it's a erosion barrier where any sediments that might run off of our fields or grass clippings from the field borders, they're all going to get captured in this little wall of tree branches. And one, this is keeping our waterway clean, but another thing it's doing is it's building our soil. So over time, you know, we'll see really, really healthy soil there. And that's the kind of the first step for us holding nutrients on our property and preventing it from going out into the waterway. So let's jump to the next slide, and I'll talk about a step here that is part erosion control and part soil restoration. So this is our crop rotation at Gaia. I noticed Drew had this as his second most important step to regenerative agriculture, right behind eliminating chemicals. And so this slide here kind of shows our typical rotation at Gaia. Like I said, we grow a wide diversity of different crops. Our top 3 crops are right there at the top. We've got Echinacea purpurea on the left. That's purple coneflower. We grow this for its root as well as the seed and what we call the aerial parts, which is basically an 18-inch stem. It kind of looks like a cut flower. This year we planted, I think, 23 acres, and next year we're going to plant about 30. The crop at the top, usually this year we've gone with a winter rye. We picked that because it was the most affordable option, and we also made the decision that we were only going to purchase organic seeds. There are some exceptions in organic certification where if you can't find the seed that you're looking for from an organic supplier, you can purchase other seeds. But I look at my role, my job being a steward of this money, and I want to support other companies that hold the same values as Gaia. So, we'd made decisions not to buy certain crops we were really excited about using as cover crops so that we could purchase something that's organic. And we use this cover crops for a number of reasons. Initially, we use it to cover our soils and to prevent erosion, especially in the winter. Sometimes you'll go by a farm where the farmer has left the field tilled all winter long. And every time you get a winter rain, some of that topsoil, some of that nutrients is going to wash off the property, go into the waterways, and that's just nutrients that the farm's never going to have again. Another thing is these cover crops, they pull nitrogen from deep underground as they expand their root system out and bring it up there to the surface. And when we terminate it by rolling it in or tilling it in, we're leaving that nutrients right there on the top few inches of soil where it's going to be available for our young plants, new roots to reach. So we're building that topsoil as opposed to the subsoils. And the third crop there is Milky Oats. This is our other most popular crop. This is one that I think this year we did 20 acres. Next year we're looking at doing 30 acres. It's really a special crop for us because it's something that we cannot source anywhere else. It's something that we have to grow on the farm. We've tried buying it as close as Georgia, and we're right here in western North Carolina, so just a couple hours away. And the crop came and ruined. It had already kind of started spoiling in just a few hours of being in the car. So it's something that we harvest on the farm by hand and get right into processing immediately after we harvest it. So what we're doing here is we're basically just growing oats, but instead of letting it turn to like oatmeal and getting a mature seed, we're plucking it when it's at a milky stage. We'll actually go out there and test each pod and squeeze it with our fingers, and when it first open with milk, that's the time to harvest it. And the thing about these plants that you see on here is each one of these plants has a different niche, different nutrient requirements. So if you look at the Echinacea purpurea, for example, this is a plant that's going to take a lot of phosphorus and potassium. And our cover crop is going to build nutrients and add nitrogen to our soil, especially if we're using a nitrogen fixer like the clover or the rye. The Milky Oats, they use a lot of calcium. They're still using a little bit of nitrogen and phosphorus and potassium. And then we have the leafy crops down at the bottom, which would be like we grow a lot of mints, so lemon balm, what we call American skullcap, feverfew, stinging nettles, different things like that. And that's one that, we're really just growing that for its leafy green, so that's a big nitrogen user. But by changing up these crops, we're not taking the same thing out of the soil. If we grew Echinacea purpurea every year, we'd have a huge deficit in our potassium and phosphorus in our soil. We might keep a lot of calcium in our soil, which is something I don't think that plant really uses a lot of, but we'd really deplete other things in our soil. So by adding compost every year and changing the crop that we're growing in the field, we're really taxing the soil a lot less and enabling it to produce more for us. So, like I said, this is one way here that we use these cover crops to prevent erosion. As soon as we harvest stuff, we try to immediately plant a cover crop in there. So we're keeping that soil covered. There's maybe about 4 or 5 days in there when the seeds are germinating, when there's bare soil exposed. But apart from that, we're really focusing on keeping it covered. And the other thing we're doing here is we're building nutrients in the soil. This year we just did a buckwheat cover crop, which you can see down there on the right side. Beautiful flower. The fields look awesome. Tons of pollinators out there. So we're providing food for our 200 beehives and, really taking good care of those pollinators. And we're literally rolling that in right now and planting a rye crop right into it. So we're literally doing 2 cover crops in a row. And this serves more purposes than just restoring the soil and erosion control. Like I said, it produces benefits for our pollinators, and it also helps suppress our weeds. So this is, instead of using Roundup to control our weeds, we use cover crops in combination with hand weeding on our farm. We don't use any plastic. There's no row covers. There's no plastic irrigation lines in our fields. We do use plastic seeding trays because we start about 20,162 cell trays each year. So it's like, I think it's like 3.4 billion seedlings or no, sorry, 3.4 million seedlings. But we reuse those trays. We get really durable, rigid trays that we can use for 5 to 10 years if we take care of them well and everything. And so I did mention that tilling earlier. That's a really common thing you hear a lot about. There are a lot of farms that do no-till or reduced tillage, kind of like what the Rodale Institute's doing, where they have to bring in some rotations, but they're also using the cover crop to do a no-till when they plant their soybeans. But we do kind of have to till it on our farm. We need to, like I said, we have a lot of flooding issues, so we build raised beds where we lift up our plants so they're about 9 inches above the rest of the ground. So if it does flood, they've got a little step stool above the water table, which really ends up saving a lot of our plants and helping them survive through those wet times. But the thing that we focus on is we basically replant our soil with beneficial organisms. We've had a big push this year to work on doing things like implementing compost tea, where we're breeding beneficial bacteria and fungi and basically putting the soil biology back into our soil. We have this amazing rich soil here, but if we don't have those microorganisms that work with the plants, we're not going to be able to really have the healthiest plants possible. So we look at what we're doing here is we're farming our soil and those soil microorganisms just as much as we're farming our crops. The plants are obviously our finished product, and it's what we're making our money off of, but we acknowledge and we know that these plants wouldn't be able to do what they do if we didn't have microorganisms decomposing material in the ground and making different nutrients bioavailable for our plants. So, that's a little picture of kind of what we do at Gaia and what regenerative agriculture really means to us. It's all about giving our plants the healthiest soil possible, so that in turn we have the most potent and the strongest plants possible for our final product. I'd like to pass this over to Will. I'm really excited to hear what he's got to say.
Well, thank you. Good to be on with y'all today. I'm Will Harris. My farm in Bluffton, Georgia is called White Oak Pastures. My great-grandfather came here in 1866. I'm the fourth generation on this farm. My daughters, who are working on the farm, are the fifth, and they've given birth to my grandchildren, who are the sixth. So it's a multi-generational, multi-species, vertically integrated farm. The thing I guess I enjoy most about it is the way that in the 153 years we've been on the farm, it's come full cycle from the focus of my great-grandfather and grandfather, very focused on animal welfare, the quality of the land, and the enrichment of the local community. Post-World War II, my father changed the farm, industrialized it, commoditized it, centralized it, as that's the way business was done post-World War II. I came home from college and further industrialized the farm, and it became a monoculture of only cattle, very heavily dependent upon chemical fertilizer, pesticides, subtherapeutic antibiotics, confinement, feeding, hormone implants, all those tools that reductionist science gave agriculture to take cost out of production. But for the last 20 or 25 years, I've been moving the farm back to a model more similar to my great-grandfather and my grandfather. Today we pasture raise and grass feed 5 different species: cows, hogs, sheep, goats, rabbits, and we hand butcher them in the USDA inspected plant that I built here on the farm. We pasture raise 5 poultry species: chickens, turkeys, geese, guineas, ducks, hand butcher them in a separate facility here on the farm. We raise organic vegetables and honey and a number of other little ancillary kinds of operations. We endeavor to operate the farm as zero waste. Excuse me. Our processing plants generate about 9 tons of animal waste a day, Monday through Friday. That would be non-marketable, the feathers, eviscerate, gut fill, heads, etc. Some bones that aren't good soup bones. We compost that and apply it to the farm, to the soil, to the land. The farm is 3,200 acres. It's basically divided up into 100 30-acre paddocks. We move the animals pretty much every day, and I'm really delighted with what that's done to the soil. Over the last 20 years, my land has moved from 0.5% organic matter to over 5% organic matter, and it's an incredible difference. It's a difference in dirt that's just a mineral medium, dead mineral medium, to real soil, living soil that's teeming with life. That picture you see there is from my farm on the right. The other one is from a neighbor's farm, 25 feet away, same soil type, no difference in them except for 5 strands of wire and 20 plus years of what I call prescriptive grazing. I told you we move the animals every day, and there is a pattern to it, but it's highly prescriptive. We're very dependent upon animal impact to shape the farm. Every species of animal has a different impact. The desired context of our farm is a warm, season, perennial pasture with 20 or 30% shade, and during different seasons, different times of the year, different depending on rainfall and many other things, different animal impact is called for. Generally, it's biomimicry, the emulation of nature. We copy the herbivore moved by the predator. the way buffalo would have been moved by wolves or caribou by polar bears or gazelles by lions, and that is a really significant animal impact with moved quickly and a very long recovery time. And it's incredible what that's done for our soil. A unintended consequence of this is the fact of what it's done to our local community. The farm is about 4 miles long and about a mile wide, and right in the middle of it is a little town of Bluffton, Georgia, incorporated city with 100 people. And Bluffton has changed from literally an impoverished ghost town where nothing was happening to a really pleasing little community now. White Oak Pastures is the largest private employer in the county. We employ 165 people full time. Our people made twice the county average last year, and it's just incredible what that's done to the town. We're very excited about that. I'm cognizant of our time. We don't have much left. I think they want to have a question and answer, but I would invite you all to look at our website. That graph that's showing right now is on the website. If you look at whiteoakpastures.com in the environmental section, you will see that we had a life cycle analysis performed on this farm by Qantas, a very expensive study that General Mills was good enough to pay for. And it showed what I spoke of earlier, that over the last 20 years we've increased the organic matter from 0.5% to 5%. But more specifically, what it's shown is that White Oak Pastures is a carbon sink. For every pound of beef that we produce, we sequester 3.5 pounds of carbon dioxide equivalent. You can see the other comparisons there. Most notable, I think, is the Impossible Burger, the vegetable-based protein that actually releases 3.5 pounds of carbon dioxide equivalent for every pound of Impossible Burger. So what that means is if you want to break even, for every Impossible Burger you eat, you've got to eat one of my grass-fed hamburgers. I bring that up because I do want to make the point that we hear over and over and over again how livestock, particularly cattle, are destroying the earth. And I would submit to you that the only cost-effective way to regenerate depleted land is through animal impact. You simply can't do it without it cost-effectively. Cattle are not destroying the earth. Input-intensive agriculture for maximum production is destroying the earth. Thank you all for having me today.
Great. So we have quite a lot of questions, and we'll try to get to as many as we can before needing to move on and wrap up our webinar to let everyone go on time here. I will say that we have quite a few that we had submitted during our webinar today, and a few that were submitted ahead of time. So I believe we'll start with those and potentially add on to our webinar series to continue answering as many questions as we can. I'm hoping our panel can talk a little bit about the best practices for crop rotation, and specifically, talk a little bit as well about the difference between cover crops and crop rotation.
I don't know if you want me to take that.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so I think in my one slide I use green manures versus cover crops. So I think the difference there is a green manure that is intentionally used. It's a plant-based crop or plant, used specifically for fertility. Organic farmers have been using that for a long time and probably to build their fertility, but their intention wasn't probably, at least not 20, 30 years ago, to try to sequester carbon, but it does have that result. A cover crop is something that is not your cash crop, and it usually is meant to cover the soil, prevent erosion, could hold on to nutrients that were in the soil but will be lost, especially in temperate climates when you have heavy rainfalls from fall to spring. A lot of your nutrients can leach out of the soil. So having a growing and living plant there. Rye is a good one because it can be planted late and grow into the fall and spring. It produces heavy biomass. I think it's important to consider incorporating legumes. Some of our studies have shown that legumes probably are doing a better job or actually sequester carbon better than grass-based cover crops. So I guess, for brevity, it's basically not your cash crop, but it's a crop that goes on, after or before your cash crop. And in some cases, we're trying to be creative and grow it at the same time as your cash crop or plant it intercropped with your cash crop.
And to reiterate the slide from Gaia Herbs that I showed earlier, to kind of give the big picture of that, basically what we're doing is we'll have like a 2-year root crop, then we'll overwinter a cover crop, then we follow it with a grain like the Milky Oats. We might throw another crop in there, or then we'll just directly plant in a leafy green herb crop that we'll keep in the ground for 1 to 2 years, depending on the species. Cover crop again, and then we go back to the root crop. So it's really a cycle there. You'll see vegetable farmers will do this, growing like garlic, beans, tomatoes, squash, back to garlic kind of thing. But it's just all about keeping diversity from year to year in your field, and it also helps diseases from building up. So it has a lot of different benefits.
I think we only have time for one other question, and I think one we've heard frequently is the question of how we continue to build this work and how brands can support regenerative work. I'm curious what our panel has to say there.
This is Will. I hear, I'd like to address that. I hear a lot of discussion about supporting this sort of work, and a lot of consideration given to regulation to promote, almost enforce this sort of agriculture. We hear a lot of talk about farmers being very proactive in moving towards this sort of agriculture, other things. But what's true is that the kind of farming practices we're talking about today will be implemented or not implemented depending upon what the consumer wants. Wendell Berry says something like the consumer votes every day with his food dollar on how he wants the world to be. And there's nothing truer with regard to support for this kind of farming. It's almost like there's a disconnect. We have a lot of visitors at White Oak Pastures. People come to see what we do, how we do it, and they're wonderful people for the most part. And they say, "Oh, I'm just so happy to see this kind of farming going on, and just really hope you'll be successful." Well, these are the people that get to decide whether or not we'll be successful. To come here and or not just my farm, the other farms across the country that are doing things properly. and to brag on them and talk about how wonderful it is, how good it is, and then go to a big box store and buy your food from a multinational food company is not that's not going to work. If consumers want this kind of agriculture, they care about this kind of animal welfare, this kind of rural enrichment, this kind of regenerative soil atmosphere, this contribution towards climate change, mitigating climate change, then they're going to have to financially support the farmers by buying their food from them. It's very simple.
Yeah, I really agree with Will on that. But to kind of build on that from our company's perspective, I think sourcing is really one of the most important things. You know, at Gaia, we have a whole department that solely does sourcing. I know one of our sourcing folks and an R&D person was in New York last week. I think they're in Oregon this week visiting farms. And, you know, we really try to look into all the products that we buy and make sure we're supporting the right things. I know our marketing team does that when they buy T-shirts. I know that our chef does that when he buys local meat to include in our lunch program. And it kind of builds on what I said earlier about, you know, I didn't want to buy conventional untreated cover crop seeds this year. So I spent another week pretty much searching around trying to find the best price for certified organic seed. And money talks, and you know, you'll figure out when you find a farmer to source from that really cares. You know, you hear the way Will and Drew talk about what they do. They know their stuff and they're passionate about it. And when you find a farmer that has that passion, you know, that's someone that you need to bend over backwards to work with, because that's what makes a difference on a global scale at the end of the day.
Absolutely. Nova, I'm hoping we can get your thoughts on this as well before transitioning to some of our final comments.
It's been great to hear about all of these agronomic innovations and approaches that our guest panelists have been sharing with you to rebuild soil fertility. But I recognize that many of you in the webinar today actually represent brands, and you're working with farmers of all different stripes around the world. And I know that you will need to build the business case for your management teams and your colleagues in order to invest in a regenerative agriculture and sourcing program. And I would encourage you to do this because brands have a huge opportunity to support a regenerative agricultural system, and many consumers and investors believe that brands have a responsibility to do this. In order to take that opportunity, I wanted to arm you with some of the key elements of the business case for regenerative agriculture and sourcing, as you can see here. And I've outlined several of them, both for your brands, your companies, and your business, as well as the benefits for the farmers that you work with and for the environment in which you operate. So this is a triple bottom line business case, and we'd be very happy to work with you to build your own specific business case relative to the products and ingredients that you're sourcing. And on the next slide, I want to share with you one of the most successful strategies available to brands like yours to support regenerative agriculture, and that is to potentially create a regenerative product or to at least source ingredients for one of your current products from regenerative suppliers. And on this slide, I'm sharing with you some of the data about the return on investment for this type of strategy. According to New Hope's consumer surveys, shoppers have very strong purchase intent for regenerative products, and over 50% of millennials say that they will pay more for them. Their concept database also shows that products that have a regeneratively produced positioning in the marketplace have had a 77% probability of success. Furthermore, according to How Good, which is a sustainability ratings organization, in the retail sales data that they track, the products that have regenerative attributes are vastly outselling all of the others that are quote-unquote sustainable in each of the categories that you can see here. And as you can see, It's nearly off the charts when it comes to the grocery category, but very high in dairy and frozen foods as well. So there is evidence that a regenerative sourcing and regenerative product development approach could be very successful for many of your brands, and I'd be happy to share other data sources that I have on this topic. But what I find most inspiring is that across food, fashion, and other industries, brands, farmers, and consumers could be working together to solve these very pressing challenges of our time by supporting regenerative agriculture through your sourcing and other mechanisms and building a new kind of marketplace. So with all you've learned today from our guest panelists and from what we've discussed about the potential market opportunity and the business case for investing in regenerative agriculture, I hope that many of you are inspired to build your own regenerative program. And we are ready to work with you at any point along that journey, helping you identify where your opportunities lie, how to engage with farmers and NGOs in the space, and how to ultimately demonstrate progress toward a more regenerative system and a regenerative marketplace. And we are happy to work with companies at any point along the value chain, farms to manufacturing facilities to the brands that I know many of you represent. So please contact us. We're happy to share some of the data that we referenced today and to collaborate with each of you. And we will be continuing this webinar series with the next topic focusing on incentives. Thank you so much for joining us today.